We do not inherit the earth from our ancestors. We borrow it from our children. For me, the world is my playground, but it's also my responsibility. We have only one planet, and it's our task to take care of it. I'm on a mission to find out the greatest environmental issues facing humanity and what part we can play to make a difference. I'm getting down to earth, for nature, for you. Tatjana, thanks again for joining me. We're in the heart of Cape Town, and surprisingly, there's a farm. Tell me more about this place.
This is Oranje City Farm. It was previously a park where the Camisa runs underneath, a source of water that comes straight off Table Mountain. And through the initiative of a few hardworking people and the community, they have turned it into a productive market garden. They grow produce to sell here at the market.
Here's the shocking fact that 1/3 of SA's food goes to waste. And how does that happen in a poverty-ridden country such as South Africa?
It really is an extraordinary fact, and it's just another example of the absurdities in our modern food system. We produce enough food for everybody to have a nutritious, largely vegetarian diet, and yet in South Africa, almost a quarter of our population don't know where their next meal will come from. We have stunting rates in children under the age of 5 that is only increasing. So it really is hard to wrap your head around that figure, knowing how much need there is in South Africa and how much important environmental resources in the land, in the water, in the sun were required to create that food.
Obviously, it looks like there's a cost implication to all this.
There certainly is a cost implication. The CSIR did a study a few years back, and their estimates were the cost of food waste to the South African economy was in the region of 61.5 billion rand.
What?
Yeah. I mean, we did some estimates around what the energy costs and the water costs were, and found that that third of food represents enough energy to power the city of Johannesburg for 4 months.
So Tatjana, give me a practical example of how 1/3 of our food goes to waste.
You know, food gets wasted on farm for a number of reasons. It might be that there's a speck on the leaf, or there's something that means the fruit or vegetable doesn't meet the specifications set by the supermarket who was going to be the buyer. So it gets rejected. Or there's overplanting. So a farmer has planted more than the market can absorb. And in those cases, you often find that, for instance, lettuce will just get plowed back in the field. It'll never get eaten. You'll see tons of plums rotting in the sun at the height of the season because the market price makes it unaffordable for the farmer to take that fruit to the market. Or if it's a globally traded commodity like sugar or maize, you may just find that it's cheaper that year to buy it from South America than to buy it from the local farmers. And then the farmers have more than they can sell.
And how does our diet come into play?
So in South Africa, our diet has changed rapidly over the last few years. We used to have a relatively healthy diet, whole grains, low-fat meats, fresh fruit and vegetables. We've increasingly gone towards a westernized diet or an American-type diet. Lots of processed food, energy-rich, and those foods actually have quite high impacts on the environment because there are many more stages in the way they are processed, but also there is a propensity to eat more and more protein than is probably healthy for us, but that is also the category that has the greatest environmental impacts and high levels of waste.
95% of our food waste occurs before the consumer's involved. How's that even possible?
Really, the waste occurs before it gets to you and I, before it gets to our kitchens. The real volume of waste is occurring on the farm, at post-harvest, and in processing. And I think it's about really thinking differently about our food. It's about taking actions to improve cold chain management, to improve distribution of food, to improve the volume of processing, so food that can't be consumed before it's going to spoil, at least it gets turned into juice or dried fruit, and then the very important action of distributing that food, finding local distribution networks to get food off farm and into vulnerable communities.
So what are some practical steps that can be taken to obviously avoid this?
Well, I think this is a problem that we all have responsibility for and that we all can benefit from. So there are practical steps that you and I can take, and that's really, I think one of them is don't necessarily take that date label as the gold standard in making a decision. It was originally introduced to help the supermarket better understand how to do stock management, you know, what comes off, what gets replaced. But we've now taken it as the final indication of whether something could be eaten, where our grandmothers would have sniffed the thing, maybe eaten a bit of the thing, licked it, you know, done something to test before they just turfed it. So I think there's something that we can do in our own homes, but then there's also action that needs to be taken by government in terms of policy incentives, support for the actors throughout the supply chain, and then there's a lot of work that can be done in our food manufacturing and retail sector to resolve this. The retailer also has a very important role to play, because the retailer, so the Pick n Pays and Woolworths and Shoprite Checkers of this world, they see down towards the farm and they see up towards you and I, and they can send messages and ways of supporting action through the supply chain to help reduce that waste.
And Tatjana, what is WWF's policy on this?
Well, I think for WWF, food waste or reducing the amount of food that is lost in the system isn't the silver bullet that's immediately going to ensure that we have less environmental impact on the farm, that vulnerable people who need it most are going to get food. What it is, though, is a really important conversation starter. Because it's an economic argument, it's not even really a social argument or an environmental argument, it makes sense to save food. It makes sense that food that's grown to be eaten by humans is ultimately eaten by humans. So for us, there are huge opportunities in this conversation. It's one that government and the private sector are keen to engage in, and the people in the street, they too want to understand how do they reduce their monthly costs and how do they identify what's going to waste, why is there waste, and reduce that in their own homes.
70% of our food types, which consists of fruits, vegetables, cereal, go to waste. I mean, I'm no expert, and we definitely need those kind of food types as South Africans.
Without a doubt. And increasingly, in fact, as our diet becomes more processed and more unhealthy, whole grains, fruits, vegetables, they're critical parts of our diet. But they also, particularly fruits and vegetables, are environmentally high impact products to grow. They need lots of water, they need energy from the sun or from fertilizer, they need storage, so they can't just be left out in the sun, they need to go into cold storage. So they come with a lot of and they need huge amounts of land. I mean, think of an orchard, it's massive, you know. So environmentally, those are really high impact products to waste, but we shouldn't be eating less of them. It's not a case of the consumer needing to take that out of their diet. It's much more about how do we earlier in the chain at the farm or at the processor look for ways of reducing that waste. What we need is local distribution networks to get food off the farms, fruits, vegetables off the farms, where farmers don't see a value in getting it to market, but would really like to see that food eaten by those who need it.
I mean, 20% of our water is getting wasted because of the food that's already being wasted. How should we look at this figure, and how should we go about making sure that the one does not have a knock-on effect on the other?
Yeah, well, we're standing in Cape Town in the middle of the worst drought in 100 years, and we forget that with 60% of water being used or more in agriculture, our food, what we eat, actually represents a significant portion of the water that is available for us to use in society. So we definitely need to think about equating that half a hamburger you might have wasted, that equals a 60-minute shower in terms of the water that was used in the growing of the grain for the bread, in the tomato, in the lettuce, in the raising of the livestock. I mean, livestock take an enormous amount of water to produce. So that's absolutely something we need to think about. We need to start thinking about our food not just as what's on the plate, but the many connections it has out into the environment and to the people who played a role in getting it to our plate.
If we do cook and we're not going to use it the next day or the day after, we put it in the freezer, so that prolongs it as well. But we try to make our footprint as little as possible. But there's always fresh veg that always gets thrown away, sadly.
I think a lot of people have a similar problem to what I have, especially people living in smaller groups or living alone or living with only 2 people, not a family anymore. You end up over catering.
Like, for instance, where the area where I live, there are people who live in the streets, and sometimes they come in knocking at the doors and asking for food. Instead of saying no straight ahead, you can just think about it and actually give the food that you have, because you might have food stored, but because you want to get rid of somebody at the door, you don't think about it.
My girlfriend is into this movement called Zero Waste. So we have two bokashi bins under the sink. So we take that to the Ranyazif market or the little farm there, and they have a big composting system, as well as I have a little earthworm farm.
Well, I'd guess by smaller portions, and then with that, then would then cut down on wastage.
I can definitely be doing more, but I'm not always aware what. Yeah.
Food wasted in South Africa is currently sitting at 210 kilograms per person per year.
Yeah, I mean, this is one of those issues that lends itself to some quite extraordinary figures. I mean, we tried to make visible the volume that a third of food wasted, 10 million tons, is in South Africa. It would fill Greenpoint Stadium 6 times over, I mean, right to the brim. So that gives you a sense of just what that 210 adds up to.
What more can we do as consumers to reduce this figure?
Well, there's lots that we can do, and it really makes sense for us to do it because it'll cost us less in the long run. And it's simple things. It's things like only buying as much as you're going to eat, planning your meals, planning your shopping, storing it where you can see it so that you don't forget it at the back of the cupboard or the back of the fridge. And I think it really is going back to that idea of don't trust the date label, trust your own instincts. Prepare less food and serve less food.
Tatjana, thanks a lot again for inviting me to this beautiful place. But before I let you go, can you please give me 3 important tips that you think could impact how people eat and reduce the wastage of food?
Yeah, so just sitting here, I'm thinking, well, maybe it's 2 peas and a tea. So it's about planning, so plan your meals. It's about preparing, so prepare only what you plan to eat, and those things that can't be eaten before they'll spoil, cook them and freeze them. And the tea is actually about thinking differently about your food. Like you say, this is a beautiful farm, but it's also an example of just how hard you have to work to bring this food to the table. So if we just started cherishing our food and cherishing not just the land or the seas that gave rise to it, but every hand that played a part in getting it to our tables, I think we would think very differently about it, and we would just automatically waste less.
Tatjana, I'm definitely changing my grocery list after this.